They say every family has a favorite, but in ours, it was never a secret. Danielle was the sun, and the rest of us were just expected to orbit around her. From the time we were kids, she got the attention, the leniency, the benefit of the doubt. I remember being 10 years old and getting grounded for scratching Dad's car with my bike, while Danielle, barely 7, crashed Mom's laptop and got comforted with ice cream. It was always like that, and I got used to it. Or I thought I did. I don't think I really understood just how deep it ran until the wedding. Danielle met this guy, Logan. Nice enough on the outside, all veneers and vineyard charm. Worked in finance. Big smile, hugged you like a politician. From the moment she introduced him, Dad lit up like he'd just closed $1 million deal. It was Logan this and Logan that. And suddenly we were planning a wedding the size of a royal coronation. When I say we, I mean the family. But mostly Dad. He was invested. And by invested, I mean $300,000 worth of imported florals, drone videographers, Swarovski-studded invitations, and a damn-string quartet flown in from Italy. No exaggeration, I saw the receipts. He booked a mansion outside Napa for the ceremony, and the entire bridal party stayed in private villas. The wine alone probably cost more than my daughter's first car will one day. I wasn't jealous, at least not then. I was stunned, confused, trying to rationalize it. He's just proud of her, I told myself. He's celebrating her the way a father should. But it gnawed at me. Not because he was generous. I'm not the type to count another person's blessings, but because I had never seen him extend that kind of energy, money, or emotional bandwidth to anyone else in the family. Not to me. Not to my mom, even. And I started noticing the language he used. He didn't say Danielle's wedding, he said our family legacy. He framed it like this event was a monument to the values and prestige of the Grant family line, and that somehow Danielle had earned the right to represent that. Meanwhile, I'd been working since I was 16. I helped pay for my own college. I turned down a job in another state because Dad said he needed someone close to home to help with Mom when her health got worse. I never asked for help, never wanted to seem like I was using my family. And I had always believed that my loyalty, my reliability, those invisible things mattered. But I saw during that wedding just how visible success had to be to count in Dad's eyes. I gave the toast at the rehearsal dinner. I stood there with a glass of champagne, smiling like it didn't bother me that I was a supporting character in someone else's fairy tale. I made people laugh. I kept it light. But even then, something in me cracked, just a little. Then came the real test. The moment that would rip the illusion down completely. Not a party, not a celebration, but a crisis. That's when I found out how much my daughter's life was worth to him. 6 months. That's how long it took for the whole illusion to collapse. Danielle's wedding was still echoing in everyone's social feeds. Picture-perfect smiles, champagne towers, videos edited to look like movie trailers. Dad was still gloating about it at dinner parties like he'd orchestrated the Met Gala. Meanwhile, I was waking up in a cold sweat almost every night because something was wrong with my daughter. Harper was 5 at the time. Bright. Curious. The kind of kid who'd ask you questions you didn't know how to answer, like why the moon followed us home, or what happens when trees dream. She had this wild, limitless energy. And then, all of a sudden, she didn't. It started with little things, fatigue, fevers that came and went, bruises that didn't make sense. We thought it was a virus. Maybe anemia. Kids get sick. You try not to panic. But then came the ER visits, the blood work, the specialists, and then the word you think only happens to other people's families, leukemia. There's no way to explain what it feels like to hear that about your child. It's not just fear. It's guilt, helplessness, rage, all crushing you at once. We caught it early, which they said was good, but the treatment would be long, intense, and expensive. Insurance covered some of it, but not all. The specialist we needed was out of network. The experimental treatment that had the best success rate wasn't approved yet. And we were suddenly looking at numbers that made my head spin. $128,000 up front. Not over time. Not after a few forms and calls. Now. I remember sitting in the car after that meeting with the doctor, staring at the parking lot through the windshield like it was going to give me answers. My wife, Rachel, was trying to be strong. I could see her hand shaking as she dialed her sister to ask about fundraising platforms. That was the moment I broke. I thought about the wedding. I thought about those goddamn orchids from Ecuador flown in by crate. I thought, if he could do that for her, surely he'd help save his own granddaughter. It took everything in me to call him. When he picked up, he was cheerful. Told me he'd just gotten back from a golf trip in Scottsdale. He asked how Harper was doing, casually, like he'd forgotten I mentioned she'd been sick. I told him what the doctor said. I laid it out plainly: the diagnosis, the treatment plan, the cost. I didn't even ask right away. I just gave him the facts and waited for the father in him to show up. There was a long pause. Then he cleared his throat and said, "That's a lot of money, Jarvis." "No kidding." I said I knew it was. That I wouldn't be asking if it weren't urgent. That I'd pay him back. Interest, whatever he needed. But he cut me off before I could finish. "I'm not a bank, son. You've got a job. You've got options. Loans, grants. You can't expect me to fund every crisis that comes along. That's not how life works." I don't remember much after that. Just a loud, high-pitched buzzing in my ears. I think I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was the only thing left between me and screaming. I asked him if he was serious, if he honestly thought this was a crisis like a car repair or a bad investment. He didn't yell. He didn't rage. He just said, "You need to learn how to stand on your own. I've given you enough. Given me enough." I hung up before I could say something I'd regret. But the truth is, I don't regret anything anymore. That call changed everything. It shattered something in me. Whatever lingering hope I had that he'd ever see me, really see me, was gone. We found a way. Rachel's parents helped. I picked up extra consulting gigs. We maxed out credit cards. A friend from college organized a fundraiser, and strangers donated more generously than my own blood ever would. And somehow, we scraped together what we needed. Harper got the treatment. She pulled through. And today, thank God, she's healthy. Still full of questions. Still dreaming with the trees. But something else changed, too. Me. I stopped calling. I stopped showing up to the family dinners, the photo ops, the Grant legacy moments that he still tried to orchestrate. I didn't make a scene. I just disappeared. Quietly. Deliberately. Because once you realize someone values their public image more than your child's life, there's no going back. But here's the thing about men like my father: they don't like silence. They're not built for being ignored. They're used to being the center of gravity. And when they can't pull you back in, eventually, they come looking. It had been nearly 3 years since we spoke. 3 years since that call, the one where he told me, in so many words, that my daughter's life wasn't worth a dent in his retirement portfolio. Since then, I hadn't seen him, hadn't called, hadn't even heard his voice in a voicemail. The wedding photos came down. The old Father's Day cards got boxed up. I kept things civil for Mom's sake, but after she passed, even that thin thread snapped. It's funny how quiet the world gets when you stop chasing approval. I was at peace with the silence. I'd made my own family, my own rhythm. Rachel and I rebuilt our finances piece by piece. Harper was thriving. Soccer on weekends, piano lessons on Wednesdays, endless questions about constellations. The crisis had carved something deep in me, but it had also made me sharper. Stronger. I didn't need his validation anymore. I had proof of my worth living in my house, asking me for cereal at 6 a.m. So when he showed up at my door, I didn't recognize him right away. It was a Saturday morning. I was in sweatpants, folding laundry, and I heard the knock. Not a neighbor's knock, not a package drop. A firm, rehearsed, almost ceremonial knock. I opened the door, and there he was. Older, smaller than I remembered. His once impeccable hair thinning, the suit tailored but hanging a bit too loose. Still holding himself like a man who expected to be invited in. "Jarvis," he said, like the years hadn't happened. Like we hadn't lived through a war of absence. I didn't speak. I just stared. He shifted on his feet, tried to smile, but it cracked at the edges. I was hoping we could talk. Every part of me wanted to slam the door. But I didn't. Not because I forgave him, I didn't. Not because I was curious. I wasn't. I let him in because when someone like him shows up after years of silence, they don't do it for closure. They do it because they need something. And I wanted to know what. We sat in the living room. He looked around like he was assessing damage. Not the furniture, me. Measuring who I'd become without him. "I made mistakes," he said after a while. I know that. I stayed quiet. Let the words hang there like wet laundry. He was never good with directness. He spoke like a man giving a eulogy for his own image, full of regrets, none of them named. Then he said it. Danielle's gone. I blinked. Gone. She left Logan. Took the kids. She's staying with me for now. He looked down, folded his hands. She's not well, Jarvis. Emotionally. Financially. And I'm struggling. There it was. The soft launch of the ask. I didn't respond. She's in a bad place, he continued. I've been covering things, but the accounts aren't what they used to be. Between the house and the legal bills, he trailed off, looking up at me like I was supposed to fill in the blanks. I was wondering if you might be able to help. Not just with money, with support, with family. That word. It hit like a slap. I leaned back in my chair and just looked at him. Family. Now, after all this time, after leaving us in the cold when we were bleeding, he wanted to invoke the same word he'd weaponized. Let me get this straight, I said slowly. You spent $300,000 on a wedding. Couldn't spare a fraction of that to save your granddaughter. And now that your golden child's life is cracked, you want me to pick up the pieces. He didn't answer, but his silence screamed entitlement. He wasn't used to being confronted. He was used to being obeyed. Why are you really here? I asked. You want me to play savior because the daughter you chose doesn't have anything left to offer you? That's not fair, he said quietly. No, I said. It's not, but it's true. He tried to appeal to some buried loyalty. Said he was trying to do the right thing now. That it's not too late to rebuild. But I saw right through it. He wasn't here for redemption. He was here for relief. He wanted me to validate him, to shoulder his failure, so he could feel like a father again. But I wasn't that man anymore. I stood up, told him Harper was in the backyard, healthy and whole, and that he wouldn't be seeing her today. Or tomorrow. Or any day, unless he learned what it meant to show up before the storm. He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't wait. I opened the door. Jarvis! No, I said, holding it open. You made your choices, and so have I. And with that I closed it. Not with anger, not with spite, just finality. A click that echoed louder than anything he'd said. After he left, I stood at the door for a long time. Not because I was second-guessing myself, I wasn't, but because I felt the weight of the moment settle in my chest like a stone. It wasn't grief. It wasn't anger. It was clarity, the kind that only comes after a storm has passed and you realize your house is still standing. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. It would have been easier, in some ways, if he had screamed at me, if he had defended himself, lashed out, tried to guilt me the way he always used to when things didn't go his way. But he didn't. He just stood there, looking old and lost and deeply, fundamentally uncomfortable in the silence I handed him. He wasn't used to being powerless, not in this family. And that's exactly what he was now, a man with nothing to bargain, no leverage left. The next morning, I found a letter in the mailbox. No stamp, just folded paper, heavy with the scent of his cologne, like he'd hoped it would somehow make the words more familiar. It was short, apologetic in tone, but still vague. No mention of Harper. No real reckoning. Just a string of tired sentiments. I never meant to hurt you. I didn't know how bad things really were. I hope someday you'll understand. Understand what? That he could write checks for vanity but not for love? I didn't respond. I didn't burn it either. I tucked it into a drawer, not as a keepsake but as a reminder. Some people never change, only their circumstances do. 4 weeks after, I kept waiting for the guilt to set in, for that old voice in my head to creep back, the one trained by decades of conditioning to forgive, to keep the peace, to make excuses for the man who raised me. But that voice had gone quiet, replaced by something steadier, stronger. Not spite, not revenge, just a simple understanding of where the lines were now. Danielle tried to reach out eventually, texted me about family unity and how Dad's trying. I didn't engage. I didn't need to rehash what she already knew, that unity only works when it's not built on someone else's erasure. She chose to benefit from his favoritism. I chose to survive without it. Now we live on opposite sides of that choice, and that's not something an apology brunch can fix. I remember the night Harper asked about him. She had seen a picture in an old photo album, one of the few I hadn't thrown out. It was from her 3rd birthday, the last time he ever showed up uninvited but still welcomed. She pointed to him and said, "Is that Grandpa?" I froze. For a moment, I considered lying, telling her he'd passed, or that he lived far away and we'd just drifted apart. But she deserved the truth. So I sat her down and told her, in words she could understand, that some people in our lives don't always know how to love the way we need them to, and that it's okay to protect your heart, even from people who share your blood. She nodded, like she got it. Not in a heavy way, just with the quiet, clear intuition that kids sometimes have. Then she hugged me and said, "I'm glad you're my dad." That broke me. Not in a shattered way, but in the way you break open a shell and find something precious inside. In that moment, I knew I had become the father I always needed, not in spite of mine, but because of him. I didn't need to scream at him. I didn't need revenge. I had already won. Not in dollars, not in public displays, but in the quiet trust of my daughter, in the strength of the family I built with my own 2 hands, in the peace that came from walking away without looking back. Let my father beg. Let him reckon with the legacy he chose to build, one of favoritism, of conditional love, of image over intimacy. I've already rewritten mine. And this time, I'm not passing down pain. I'm passing down truth. And love. The kind that shows up. The kind that stays.